My guest today studied politics, philosophy and economics at Oxford University and then went on to do a master's at Columbia University in the US. She's worked for a number of multinationals in an innovation role and is now involved in education. She believes that there is an opportunity today for Indians to take advantage of the best education available in the world and prepare for the knowledge domain. Welcome, Kavita Singh.
Thank you.
You believe that the world is in fact changing fast, but Indians are today in a unique position to take advantage of the education available globally and enter the knowledge domain. That's something that you have worked in yourself. You had an innovation role in 3 large multinationals. I believe you worked for the Mars chocolate company.
Yes.
You worked in the medical area as well. So how do you see innovation today as being important for Indians to keep their edge in the world, which is changing very fast towards a knowledge-dominated society?
So I think in the US, the focus on innovation has been very strong, and various companies have actually reorganized their entire organizations to actually drive innovation. That hasn't yet happened in India, however it can, but it has to start at a younger level than it's happening currently. So it has to start in terms of the way we think. So how are we actually allowing for creative ideas to develop and nurture? So to drive innovation, what you need is an open mind before you start judging ideas. And that kind of thinking needs to start in school and not just be left to when you join a corporation. So I believe that in terms of education, this kind of sort of thinking needs to be instilled at a young age, as young as possible, and then be continued and taken through into the corporate world, where while you might set up organizations and processes and everything, if the thinking isn't there, if that ability to actually go out and harness innovation isn't there, all the systems in the world are not going to drive it.
How important is education in creativity? In the old days, people used to say that a person is creative, but then you are born with creativity. You can't teach somebody to be creative. Is that true?
I do believe it's true. And I actually am a trainer in a particular course, which is called Personal Creativity. And there are various ways that you can actually drive people to be more creative. So one is the environment that the person is in. Does it actually allow for collaboration, which is very important when it comes to creativity? It doesn't matter whether it's in the house or it's in the school or it's in a corporation. So that's a critical factor. The second is in terms of the skills that you require to be creative. Some people you might find are naturally more creative than others, and that may be driven by what they've been exposed to. However, there are various ways that you can teach someone to be creative. There are various processes that you can set up where it may take someone a little bit more time to actually get comfortable with it. But once they do, I've seen people apply these processes to everyday life situations, to small things at work, which seem actually fairly tactical, yet they still come up with innovative ideas, to big strategic ideas. And this, we taught this course not just in our corporate office, but we went out to the plants and taught them to people in the manufacturing plants, people in supply chain management, etc. The same processes can be used in different functions by different people for different tasks. So yes, I truly believe it can be taught. It just takes some people more time to get comfortable with it.
You've been exposed to global education.
Yes.
Having been born in Calcutta, you really didn't study in India. You went off to Dubai with your parents. You studied in Dubai, after which you attended Oxford and Columbia University. So you studied the British system and the American system while you studied in their systems. What do you think today is lacking with the Indian system to perhaps even do better than most of these other systems? Why is it that we are still struggling to better our system? What needs to be fixed?
So I think, and you see this in the press a lot, there's too much focus on just pure academics. And this is not just happening in school. There are kids coming out of school, going to tutors, going to various classes to make sure that they're strong in academics, because the focus is so excessive on that. And doing well in your class 10, doing well in your class 12, all determine what you're going to be able to do in terms of college, getting into good college in India. However, there are various people who write about this, Malcolm Gladwell being one of them. It's how smart you are after a certain point is not what's going to determine success. It's all the other things that you require. Good leadership skills. Are you a good networker? Are you a good team player? Do you have good interpersonal skills up and down with people who are junior to you, peers, people who are senior to you? And those factors aren't being nurtured in the Indian system because pretty much 100% of the focus is on academics. And it's very interesting because I think the US does this extremely well. They do it well at college, they do it well at postgrad, and they tend to not just focus on academics, not just when they're teaching, but even in terms of actually deciding who to let into their universities. So it's part of their whole criteria when they're selecting people. So they make sure that people are building these skills, because if you don't build those skills, you can't get into top universities in the US.
You're currently advising students and institutes on improvement, on how they can get into better universities, on how universities can impart better education. Do you find this an uphill task? Do you think it's an enormous task when you do it in India?
Well, I think, just going back a little bit to what we were talking about, I think the important point or the difficulty is actually where people don't come to you in advance. So I find a lot of people coming to me a few weeks before their application deadlines and they want my help. I actually have turned a lot of people away because I said 2 weeks, you're applying to 6 schools. There's very little that I can do. You won't even have time to come and talk to me. You'll be wasting your money, frankly. I try to start working with people as early as class 9 if they're looking to go to a top-tier university in the US, because I believe it's important not just to get into the university, but to truly develop those skills. And it takes time to do that, and the universities recognize it. So they want to see these skills being developed over a continuous period of time and see progression. So if you take leadership, how are you becoming a better leader from class 9 to class 12, and how are you demonstrating this? So one, yes, there's an uphill task because people aren't thinking about how to plan in advance. The second is a lack of understanding of the system. So there's a lot more coaching that needs to go into explaining to people that the system is truly different. This is what they're really looking for. And again, because they're not used to it, it takes a lot of time for someone to understand that, which is fairly normal. They haven't been exposed to it. It's the first time they're hearing about it. A third factor that I find very interesting is I find that the writing skills in India are not strong. So people have great difficulty putting together a strong application simply because they have difficulty articulating what they may do verbally quite well on paper. And I'm noticing this across people of different age groups coming from different cities, different schools, and seems to be a factor that is not being addressed well in our system. It's very important when you're trying to actually go out and do anything in the world, whether it's in India or globally, to be able to both verbally and in written form actually articulate yourself well. And that's a key skill that seems to be missing in our system.
How you have been internationally involved with education. You've studied, of course, in many countries, but today you're looking at India, which is changing fast, and education is becoming a focus, not only for government policy, but for millions of parents who want to give their children the best that is available, not only in India, but globally. The one advantage that Indians have always had, or at least the world has perceived them to have, is English language skill. Most Indians speak English, or they've been taught some English at school, and this has given a whole industry, the BPO industry and the IT industry, a boost. Other countries like China are now looking at emulating this model and teaching English at primary level. Do you think that we will continue to have this edge into the future, or do you think that this is a time now that we need to invest more in language skill development?
I think that's a very interesting question. I do believe that we actually need to spend time investing more in language skill development. We keep reading reports about how China is doing this extensively, and there are various studies that have come out that show that they have either overtaken us or going to overtake us soon because of their heavy investment. They're also sending many more kids abroad than they ever used to. In fact, in the US, there are now more undergraduates from China than they are from India, and then I think it's about double. So we do need to make sure we keep our edge, not just with China, but with other countries who are also coming in as potentially low-cost providers in areas like IT and could become strong competitors to us. And I think the language skill needs to be developed in a number of ways. So one, it's the basic, English language. As more people are getting educated and coming into the workforce, we're seeing more people coming from not predominantly English-speaking households, so their English language skills may be weaker. So that's number one, making sure that they're fluent in English. That's more basic. I think the second is, how are we actually able to position ourselves well so that we come across as strong communicators, which is a more higher level skill. So how are we verbally presenting ourselves well? Do we know how to succinctly talk about either our company or our products or our services? That's one. Two, are we really able to have strong listening skills? So when we're sitting in a business meeting, can we actually figure out what the problem is? That's something I've seen in the US, people focus a lot on developing and nurturing, and I think we need to do a little bit more of that in India, in my limited experience to date. So that's a second skill. I think in terms of also putting together a strong pitch. So another thing that I've seen in the US, which they do very well, is they look at everything as branding and marketing. How are you taking everything and putting it together in a way that's compelling, it's easy to understand, it's digestible information, and we need to learn how to develop that, because oftentimes you only have so much time to say what you may want to, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. How are you truly bringing that across? How are you making sure everybody's actually understanding your message? And these are slightly higher level skills that are going to be very important for us.
As in all markets, there is a primary market and a secondary market. The primary market, of course, is training people at a young age and putting it into the curriculum of perhaps the schooling system or the university system. And then there is a secondary market for people who are already trained, who are out there, who are mature, I wouldn't say students, but people working in society, and people who wish to now acquire the skills that you just mentioned. Better communication skills. Do you think there is a market for that in India today?
I think there's a market for that everywhere. Again, I'm going to go back to the US. You see that in the US, executive development is a very large field, and it will develop in India in certain ways which are similar. So let's look at the US and see what is it that they have. So you have things at the corporate level, which is sponsored by corporations, things at the individual level where you may go off and do a short certification course, which is an independent company that's offering it to you. You have business schools offering short executive programs, and you have executive MBAs, where you go in at about a 10, 15 year level once you've been working for 10, 15 years to go and enhance your skills so you can continue to move up the chain in terms of your skills, and also obviously up the chain in terms of whatever you're doing, usually in a corporation or even in terms of your own business. So yes, there is a market for that today. Right now it's being focused mainly at a basic level where they're basically training people in basic skills. I believe the higher level skill development is yet to come. But it's important to obviously build the foundation, and that's why the higher level stuff hasn't come in as yet, or it's not a very big market. If you look at the numbers, it's not a very big market as yet, but it will develop. And that'll be, again, through independent providers as well as business schools who are, you look at the IIMs, the ISBs, they're already offering this. It'll become bigger in the future, I believe.
The commercialization of education, as it's called, is something that some people are opposed to. They feel that education should not be commercialized. How do you see it? Because in the US, in many European countries, of course in some European countries it is free, like in Finland education is still free for everyone who wants to go to university. But commercialization is a big issue. How do you see it? Do you think it's good or bad?
I think commercialization can be good if it's done well. Now, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it. There's a lot of areas that need to be made very clear in terms of what can happen and what can't happen. As you mentioned, in the US, there are lots of private universities that are excellent in terms of educational quality. And why is that? That's because you have serious people who know that they can actually make money out of this business, but do it in a very good way. And there's governing bodies making sure that you don't just have fly-by-night operators. That's what they're trying to do in India, make sure that they come out with this new educational bill where they have strict guidelines in place to ensure that this is not just now fly-by-night operators coming in. So I think the governing rules and the monitoring of commercial educational enterprises is what is critical in India. You see that even in the educational counseling field. In India, we don't really have any organizational bodies governing it. In the US, you have multiple organizations governing independent educational counselors. They have to abide by various criteria in order to be members of those councils. And those bodies also organize a lot of forums and information sessions and things that actually also add back to the counselor. So there needs to be all of that set up in any area of education that's being commercialized, and that's critical. If that doesn't happen, then you end up with people who are not providing good education and are yet making a lot of money out of it simply because of this lack of supply.
What about subsidy for education? This is something that also the world has different models on. Many countries provide education free of charge, and in some cases, I believe in countries like Malta, they pay students to go to university. They give them a stipend. Countries like Finland, as I said, are free, whereas Britain and America, you have to pay a very hefty tuition fee apart from the living expenses if you're an overseas student. What is your view? Do you think in India we should emulate one of these models, or should we have our own?
So I think subsidies is a very interesting question. It's a difficult one. The US has two models that actually work in terms of funding for education. They have need-based financial aid, and so there are certain schools, a number of Ivy League schools, that will give you 100% need-based financial aid. So if you are of that caliber to go to that school, they'll make sure that you get there. If you can afford to pay for it, then you pay for it. Well, I think that seems like a fair, equitable model, and potentially a good one to look at for India. There are other universities in the US that work on merit. So if you are somebody who has the talent, well, then we'll give you a scholarship because we want to make sure you get to university. In a country like India where affordability is more of an issue, I think the first model may be actually more important for us than the second one. They can also both work together. So what's great about the US system is different institutions have different models. So it's not governed by a centrally governed body. It's left up to the institution to decide which model they follow. And that could be a good way to have some autonomy as well, so that you have different institutions following different models to allow flexibility. So because we're a large country with people at various different income levels across many different tiers of cities who all need education. So don't try to create a central system which is not going to work for everyone. Try to create different models that's going to work for different pockets of society. And I think having a completely subsidized model will just not be affordable, obviously in India, like Finland. We wouldn't be able to afford to do that. And that's part of the reason why there's this sort of lack of supply already. So I don't think the Finland model would work. Another way which people are looking at is saying, well, how do we create India as potentially in the future as an education hub? So we're not just sending students abroad, but we're bringing people in. How are we also earning money out of education that can also help to continue to fund our system? And that's something that we'll need to give more thought to once we actually have the institutes to be able to do that.
Do you think India will eventually become an education hub for the world?
I think India has a very strong position to potentially do that if we build the right system. You see, there was a group of Columbia Business School students, actually two groups, so about 40 students down in India last week, where they met with various people like Kapil Sibal, and they came for their study abroad week. So it could become an educational hub in different ways. It could be a semester abroad. India is going to become, and is already, a very important area for people wanting to focus and understand how the country is working. So it could become a study abroad program, it could become a year-long exchange program, or it could be, I want to come and do my 2 years or 3 years, depending on what degree you're doing, in India, because I want to focus on something very specifically here. So I think there are various opportunities to take advantage of it. And we should definitely be leveraging it from both aspects. We should also be looking at people going abroad, not just for, a full degree program. So how can you get exposure? You could have 1 semester abroad, you could have a year abroad, you could have faculty exchange, so faculty coming in, so students who can't afford to go abroad are still getting exposure to foreign faculty, and of course people who can and are able, they go abroad maybe for a complete degree. So there are various different ways of making this model work, and I think foreign students in India and students going abroad can both benefit from this greatly.
Mark Twain is attributed to have said that I never let my schooling get in the way of my education. Do you agree with that? That one should keep his schooling there, yes, but one should never consider that as complete education.
I agree. You're always learning. So it depends on your school as well. What kind of education are you getting? If it's just a rote system, well, you're still learning something. You're learning how to keep facts in your head, right? And bring them out. That's a skill in itself. It shouldn't be the only skill that's developed, but it is a skill. So it depends on your school's system. It also depends on, aside from that, what other things are they giving you the opportunity to take advantage of? So something that I've seen, which is very good, is co-curricular or extracurricular activities are taking much more precedence in Indian schooling than ever before. So how do you take advantage of that to build skills, leadership skills, teamwork skills, or even very specific skills in if you're in the environmental club or the head of the environmental club, how are you learning about that particular subject area? So there's, within school, how are you taking advantage of everything? And then outside of school, how are you actually applying that learning and continuing to push yourself? And this continues. I mean, I continue to learn about things that, I could be called an expert in. Because you just keep reading and hearing different perspectives from different countries, different thought processes, and then using your own innovation skills to say, well, what does that mean? Maybe there's a new model I can come up with by taking all these little aspects and that somebody hasn't seen before, and creating something completely different. And I think that's tremendous. That's exciting.
After having lived in many countries and having worked in innovation and education, what is it that motivated you to come back to India and work in the field of education? Because you've hardly lived here.
So I think there are a few different motivating factors. One is I really wanted to come back and do something to contribute to the growth of India. Even though I didn't grow up here, I'm very Indian. And I feel that this is a prime opportunity to do something where you're giving back to people from your own country, and you're getting out of it as well. Whatever I'm doing, I'm obviously making a profit. I'm not in a non-for-profit business, but I'm also helping people along the way. And that's a big field that's opened up called social entrepreneurship. It's all the rage in business schools, and people are really looking at it, much more significantly than they ever did in the past. It's what positive psychologists call the meaningful life, which is the ultimate state of happiness. So that's one whole area. I could have done it in other countries, of course. It's not like I couldn't do it anywhere else, but I did want to come back and do it in a country that I believe actually really does need talent to return. And you can do it, and lead a very good lifestyle as well. You're not compromising in any way. So that was one important factor for me. I think a second important factor was, as I was coming back and exploring this idea, I was coming back and forth, spending time here and going away. I saw a huge opportunity in this field, and I really felt that people were not making good decisions because they didn't have good information. My last company was an online health information provider, and our tagline was better information, better health. And I believe that applies to many fields. And so in this case, I believe it's better information, better advice, better education. So really helping people make good choices is what my whole field is about. And I think the third aspect was really that opportunity to set up my own business. I've always wanted to do it, and this is just completely personal. And I wanted the challenge of saying, I'm going to come back to India and do it here. Some people think I'm completely crazy. They're like, well, you never grew up here. Why are you doing it? Unlike a lot of Indians, I didn't grow up here, but I returned after university, having never lived here, and I worked for 6 years. I know what it's like to work in India, and I think that's a huge advantage. It's not, I didn't leave when I was 18, so I don't have culture shock at all. I knew what to expect. I know how to put risks into my business plan, how to mitigate those risks, which a lot of people have difficulty with because they've been out of the country, for 20 years. They figure it out in the end. They're smart people. But for me, it wasn't a question mark. It wasn't an issue.
We wish you luck in your endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your views with us.